The greater part of this work was delivered in the shape of lectures at Gresham College. For that reason, I have retained the lecture style of delivery. I should have hesitated to prepare them for publication, but I was pressed to do so by some of my audience. I have therefore ventured to put them together in the shape in which they now appear. It was my intention, when first I thought of explaining the rise and progress of the customs, laws, and constitutions of England, to take as my starting point the Norman Conquest. I soon found, when I came to look into the subject, that it would be advisable to carry my hearers back to a much earlier period of time than that event, for the reasons I have given in an early part of this work. The title I have selected is, as the reader sees, Feudalism, its rise, progress, and consequences. But the nature of the inquiry has led me on to the examination and explanation of earlier events than that remarkable institution. I have dealt with the subject under 4 aspects of matter and time. In the first part, I have endeavored to portray the conditions of social and political life between the fall of the Roman Empire and the settlement of the barbarian invaders in Europe. Next to this, I speak of feudalism and its characteristics, the causes of its advent into the polity of Europe, its position with reference to the institutions which had preceded it, and its influence on the social life of Europe. Then I go on to the consideration of our own country, its early settlements, and its Teutonic immigrants, and I set out several of the Anglo-Saxon customs and laws that grew into shape and were worked into the form which our Norman conquerors saw when they arrived here. In the last place, I dwell on the conquest itself and what followed upon it. As I especially stated to my audience, my great desire was to convey the best and largest information I could lay hold of on all these points, and therefore I looked about me for the soundest and most trustworthy authorities upon the topics I should have to deal with. For the earlier portion of my narrative, I have made use of a work that to my mind is one well deserving of the notice of every student of the history of the times when the wave of barbarism that had swept over Europe had almost destroyed every vestige of law and order, and had reduced social and political life to the verge of ruin. I remember when first I read Les Essais sur l'Histoire de France, how much I was impressed with the value of the work, and how strong a light M. Guizot seemed to me to have thrown on a period of time enveloped in gloom, and whose history was to be gathered from obscure annals, from rugged chronicles, and from old characters and documents written in language hard to interpret owing to their crabbed style, and the old and almost forgotten terminology employed. It struck me that an English version of these essays, wherein the profound learning displayed is as remarkable as the skill with which the narrative is set out, might be of service to the student of the early history of our European polity. For this reason, I have worked into that portion of this book no small amount of M. Guizot's treatise, nor have I hesitated to add such other chapters of the essays as bear upon the Anglo-Norman government and the political settlement of England following on the conquest, in order that my readers may contrast the views of a learned and large-minded foreigner with those of our own best and ablest later historians. Of those historians, I have drawn extensively upon the treatises of 3, whose authority in the matter of early English history stands as the highest point of fame, and whose learning and research, charm of style, and critical acumen have made them preeminently our sure guides therein. Bishop Stubbs and Professor Freeman are still with us, and we may hope to have from them continuations of those histories of our land which have done so much to give us a new and true to give us new and true conceptions of the rise and progress of the English Constitution from its first beginning. But Mr. Green is gone from us, and in his death we have to deplore the loss of one who, as a reviewer of his work, History of the English People, has said with truth, did two things for English history. He introduced a governing mind into that which had been a fortuitous concurrence of chaotic atoms. And further, he introduced a philosophic theory of national evolution into that which had been too often treated as a mere series of disconnected stories or anecdotes, more or less interesting, of kings, nobles, and archbishops. For my own part, I know no books that for truthfulness in the story, for perfect arrangement of events, for tenderness of sentiment, for picturesque felicity of phrase, and for power of masterly combination of facts, as well as for acuteness of criticism, rival Mr. Green's Making of England and Conquest of England. To these two works I have made large reference, and from them I have drawn descriptions which I have preferred to put in Mr. Green's own words, knowing how poor would be any attempt of mine to set them out in my own language. Mr. Green, and I again quote his reviewer, has breathed life into old documents and wove the old tales into a connected and interesting story of the development of the English race. If, as is said in the same article, the Bishop of Chester and Professor Freeman are masters at whose feet Mr. Green sat, whose teaching and whose inspirations he would have been the first to acknowledge, so I may say of myself, in this work I am sitting at the feet of all three of these distinguished writers. I acknowledge, grato animo, the value to me of their teachings and inspirations, and I most sincerely hope that the references I have so freely made to the writings of Bishop Stubbs, of Professor Freeman, and of Mr. Green will send my readers to the works of those masters of the art of making the study of history not less agreeable than it is instructive. I have now to express my thanks to the delegates of the Clarendon Press for their kindness in allowing me to make use of the select charters and other illustrations of English constitutional history from the earliest times to the reign of Edward I, arranged and edited by William Stubbs, M.A., Regius, Professor of History, and first published A.D. 1870. The value of this treatise will be readily acknowledged by all whose business it is to teach or lecture on the early history of our Constitution, and I well remember the emphatic terms of commendation employed by my friend Mr. Charles H. Pearson. To Mr. Pearson's History of England, published by Messrs. Bell and Daldy in 2 volumes, 1867, I have, as the reader will see, made frequent reference. I desire to express my warm acknowledgement of the value of a work to which I am largely indebted for information on the early history of our country. And I well remember the emphatic terms of commendation employed by my friend Mr. Charles H. Pearson when in our walks together at Cambridge, where at the time he was acting as lecturer in history at Trinity College, he spoke of Professor Stubbs' book as one that threw more light on the subject discussed in it than any he knew of, and that rendered the teacher's task a much easier one than was the case in earlier days. I have also to record my thanks to the same distinguished body for allowing me to refer to and cite, where necessary, passages from Professor Freeman's History of the Norman Conquest. I have dwelt upon the importance of this learned treatise in the text of my own book, as will be seen. I have had frequent reason to refer to it. Each time that I have done so, I have been struck with the profundity of learning displayed in, and admired the charm of style that adds grace to its pages. My thanks are also due to my friends, Messrs. Macmillan and Co., for the permission they have given me to use these two books of which I have already spoken, viz. Mr. Green's Making of England and Conquest of England. I trust they will not think that I have abused the favor extended to me, and I also hope that they will find that I have carried out their wishes in carefully noting the chapters and pages from which my citations have been taken. I am under no small obligation to the worshipful company of Mercers, not only for the special favors received from them in connection with the publication of the present volume, but for frequent acts of kindness and goodwill during my somewhat long connection with the office of which they are the patrons. I know well the interest they take in all matters connected with the advancement of education, whether general or special, and interest shown by deeds of generosity and munificence, not incommensurate with the means at their disposal. In course of preparation of this book, I found that without the help of a large and well-arranged library, I should be at much disadvantage. Happily, my own legal alma mater was at hand, and on the shelves of the library of the Inner Temple, I found all I could possibly desire. Were I asked to name a place in which the student of history can find readily and without trouble almost any book he may wish for, I should unhesitatingly say that in the library of the Inner Temple, his most learned researchers can be supplied with ample material. For archaeology, for history, for topography, the Inner Temple library is almost unrivaled. But to its noble collection of books on these and other subjects, it adds the boon of a staff of attendants whose pleasure, quite as much as their duty, lies in helping the readers who throng its rooms. I beg to thank my learned friend Mr. Pickering and his kind and courteous assistants for all the goodness they have displayed towards me in the course of my present work. Those who, like myself, are under the necessity of appealing for help from time to time to the custodians of such a splendid collection of works as that I am now speaking of, will bear me out in these expressions of gratitude to the librarians of the Inner Temple. And now all that remains for me to say is that if by good chance the present work is thought to offer any help to the student of our English customs, laws, and constitution, that will be owing to the authors from whose volume so large a portion of it is taken. Its merits, if it be thought to have any, will be theirs. Its shortcomings and defects will be my own. As I have said above, my sole wish has been to convey information to others. Should I succeed in doing so, I shall esteem myself fortunate.